Hey, everybody. Jim Vanosky with Manufacturing Talks. Welcome back. And another really good show for you today. I've got Mark Peters with Butterball Farms right here in Grand Rapids. He is one of the guys in my continuing series that I'll have here on Second Chance Hiring, working with returning citizens who've been in prison, but so much more. Mark is bringing us stories across the board of how he learns from that experience to also work incredibly well with all his employees and how to build a business right and engage with people right. So lots of cool stuff coming from Mark. He's going to be with us in just a few seconds here on Manufacturing Talk. So stay tuned.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vanosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vanosky, your host, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Mark Peters. He is the CEO at Butterball Farms right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he is also author of a book called The Source that he's going to tell us about. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here today.
Well, and we've got a lot to cover. We met because of the second chance hiring stuff that we're going to talk about, but a heck of a lot more than that. Before we do, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and about your company?
Yeah, thank you. So, Mark Peters, we're at Butterball Farms is our primary company, and it's second generation family business. My dad started it in 1956, and we started by making butter with designs on it, mostly for the hotel and restaurant trade. And the company's changed quite a bit over the years. So now we do different, not just butter, but we do blends, we do some sauces. And most of our business pre-COVID was into the food service, really food service, restaurants, caterers, that kind of thing. And then when COVID hit, all of that stuff shut down and we had to learn some new tricks. So now about 40% of our products, our business shows up in some sort of a retail or grocery store location. So we've been able to navigate those new channels for the last several years, and then it's worked out pretty well for us.
Excellent. Yeah, I always love hearing those stories of companies like yours that are able to navigate some of the changes in the marketplace. First thing, I know you're very proud of your book, and seeing behind me, I'm into books myself. So let's start off with that. You wrote The Source, really to talk about how you think businesses should operate, right?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I think, I've always said, so the mission is to enrich lives, and then we have 6 guiding principles. But if I couldn't have impact with the business, I've always said that I would just sell it, because then I could do something else with the money. But in the manufacturing world in the United States today, there's such a great opportunity for impact, and I think a lot of new startup companies always are looking for, well, I want to be a social entrepreneur. What does that mean, and how do I have impact? And I think a lot of us who sort of live in the traditional manufacturing world think, well, how can we do that? And I think what I try to do with The Source, first of all, it's just a story. It's a story about starting an organization called The Source, which we started in 2003. But it was really to try to raise awareness to employers about the condition of a lot of the lives of the people that come to work for us. I think a lot of times as business owners, we don't always know or appreciate the fragile nature of the lives that a lot of people that come to work for us lead. And if we do understand it or we're aware, we don't really know what to do. And so The Source was sort of an entrepreneurial effort to try to get businesses together to actually do something to create a greater level of stability in the lives of the people that work for us. And so now we're 21 years in operation, and we've got over 20, I think we're about 28 member companies in West Michigan. It's also been replicated around the country. An organization like Work-Life Partnership, they're working in like 5 states right now, and then there's a few other replications in other parts of the country that we've been involved in helping some of those communities get similar organizations started. But really, there's now a network of these organizations and a place people can go if they're interested in learning more about how to have that kind of impact and that kind of awareness as an employer. And the book, The Source, it's an easy read. It's really kind of my story of starting The Source, and really why we did it and what the impact has been. So yeah, thank you for asking that, because if I couldn't have that kind of impact with the business, with the enterprise, I would find something else to do.
Well, and I applaud you for building that network. I think it's really too easy for us, whether we're running a company or working in a company, to kind of get, the blinders on and focused on our own little world. And there are much greater problems out there, like you point out. So excellent job of coordinating people to go after that. Now, you mentioned early on in your description of the book that you come from that manufacturing background. Obviously, I've spent my whole career in that as well. There's a certain importance to the jobs and careers that are out there in the manufacturing world. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts there.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we get at least traditional manufacturing. We get sort of a bad rap in the United States and in the school systems and all the rest. It's a little frustrating to me when the high-tech manufacturing or advanced manufacturing is sort of what everybody wants all manufacturing to be. But there are some manufacturing processes that just aren't there yet, and they don't carry some of the margins, like food manufacturing or food packaging, or some of the clothing enterprises and other sort of manufacturing operations, again, that carry less of margin. So I think what ends up happening is people think of those jobs that we have in our plants as dead end, quote unquote, dead end jobs.
Right.
And I think what I'm trying to say in The Source, and then I have a second book coming out called The Retention Trap, but is those jobs can be used as a stepping stone. If we take a different level of intentionality about our employment of people, we can really use those jobs to upskill and move people through our workforce and into better jobs.
Right.
And it's always interesting to me because it's the jobs on the factory floor that people are like, well, those are dead end jobs. But there's so many support jobs in manufacturing now. I mean, we have manufacturing engineers on our plant floor, and that's a whole another set of degrees, right? So,
right.
And we've got finance people, and we've got people that are analysts, and HR professionals, and so there's a whole lot of careers that are needed to support any manufacturing days. And those kinds of careers are sort of left off the table when we talk about what's a manufacturing job. Everybody thinks, okay, it's the plant and it's maintenance. And those are important jobs for sure.
Yep.
But there's so much more to manufacturing operations these days that it can be great careers. And moving through a manufacturing operation, even if it is your first job coming in as an entry-level person, if we take some intentionality around that, we can move people into some nice careers. And
Yeah, for sure.
we have in our company, and I've seen it in others as well. So,
Yep. Yeah, excellent point. I've seen it myself. I've seen people come through manufacturing right here in Grand Rapids and go into a variety of different other businesses and high level jobs here in the city.
absolutely.
And I'm glad you mentioned the engineering front. That's where I came up. I was an engineer on the plant floor, just like you talked about.
Right.
Well, and
Yeah.
so there's that criticality of those jobs, and it really is the backbone of our country to me. Now, then you took the additional step quite a while ago that brought us together, and that is the whole idea of hiring those people returning to society after serving in prison or being convicted. So tell us how you got into that and kind of what prompted you and some of your experiences with that.
Yeah, Jim, I appreciate you asking the question, and maybe some of the stories might be helpful. I think when you look at something with hindsight, people show up and they're like, "Oh my word, you guys do great things," and how did you, you know, and I think other people think, "Well, how do I get started doing?" I think like any entrepreneur, we kind of fell into it. It wasn't like, I sat down one day and I said, "We really should um, investigate hiring people coming out of the prison system." It was not. It wasn't like that at all. It was the late '90s, and we had we had some kids. I'm going to call them kids because they were in their 20s
Yep.
who showed up for jobs, and they were at a work release program, and they were fantastic. They were fantastic employees. They brought a lot of energy, and they were dropped off every day and picked up every day. So they were on time for work, and they were there every day. But we started learning some things when they got released. They would stop showing up for work, or they would be, it wouldn't seem as important to them to be there. We're sort of like, well, what's going on here? And it was interesting what we learned. What we learned was that, that somebody gets a little bit of a taste of not being watched every day,
Mhm.
and they decide to stay out a little late, and they sleep in the morning, and it's they get their first place that maybe they're living with some friends, or whatever that their lodging situation is, and they maybe don't tend to take that job as seriously as you would think. But what we learned is that if we said to somebody, "Hey, congratulations on getting parole. We understand that this is a big step, but we really want you. We want you to be successful. We also want you to come back to work. It's at your and we think that there's some future here for you." But that little bit of recognition and encouragement in somebody's life who has had very little of that was the difference between them coming back and not coming back.
Mhm.
And so you start to realize how many people in our world don't get even like some daily or any sort of regular encouragement, or even someone saying, "Hey, I want you to be successful, and I'm willing to help you do that."
Mhm.
That's, for some of us, that's fairly common, but for a lot of people, that is a very uncommon experience. And so um, what we learned was that we got some really uh, great employees. We had some great people that came into our organization that were coming out of the prison system, and so simply by having our interaction with those, and I'm just going to call them those boys because it
Yeah.
was mostly males that were in that um, work release program.
Yeah.
Um, and they were the ones that really introduced us to being a little bit more serious about and intentional. I would say more intentional about hiring people coming out of the prison system, and encouraging other employers to do the same thing.
Yeah. Here's one thing I find really interesting because we talked for a Forbes article that I just published a few weeks ago. I also talked to Lester Young, who is one of those guys who came out of prison, and has written books about his own experience. And it's just fascinating to me how someone like you from your end, but with a lot of years of experience, and then him on the other end of it, you guys have the same messages. I mean, even to the point where he specifically said when we were talking last week, because he was on the show 3 episodes ago, he said, yeah, people come out and they get that job and they get some money and they want to go party, which is exactly what you had said when we talked, and you just kind of reiterated it. You know, they get that freedom and want to make the most of it, and unfortunately can make some bad decisions. What are some of the other things that you've encountered as far as the kind of accommodations and help that you need to provide for people coming out of prison and re-entering the workforce?
Yeah. So that there was a version of that question in sort of the pre-work for this interview.
Right.
And I was, the version that was in the pre-work, I was just going to stay quiet because, but this version I actually have to answer. Let me explain that.
Just a challenge.
For people that are watching, you know, so people will say, well, what kind of problems have you experienced, or what kind of disruption has it caused? And there's, and I think that what's frustrating to me about the question is that when you're hiring people who've come out of the prison system, so there must be some problems, because these are obviously people that are a problem. And I think that the assumption is wrong. I think it's people that made mistakes, and somehow it was something that got them in trouble with the law, and they ended up in prison. Now, some of them are fairly significant, mistakes.
Right.
You and I have talked about that. I have somebody who tells his story frequently in our workforce, who ended up killing his best friend after partying. But significant mistakes, right?
Yep.
But these are still good people. I mean, they still are individuals that want to have a family, that want to support kids, that want to contribute to society, that want to build a life. And so with our involvement with the source has resources that can help with people coming out of the prison system. And I would not be being honest if I said that they didn't have any more challenges than anybody else. People that have not lived sort of day to day in society, it's actually, you and I were. I've got a great analogy for you. You and I were talking before the interview, and I said that, traveling a little bit, I'm in a different country, and the language barrier makes it difficult for me to interact, like on the street. So asking for directions, or trying to order food, or trying to find a restaurant or a street, because it's not a language that I'm common with. That's a pretty good analogy for people that come out of the prison system and are not used to just moving through the society that they now find themselves having to live in. And you think about some of the complexities that they have to deal with. Like they have to find a place to live, and there may be some restrictions around that. They've got to navigate those people in those organizations that can help them do it. They may have to get some government assistance for something. They may have, children or spouses, or some other sorts of things that they have to navigate through. And there's not a great handoff from the prison system to, for that individual out into the rest of the world. So
right.
and the number one reason why people go to prison is because they can't get a job. There's been such a stigma around people being incarcerated. And, I've been on stage, and I remember somebody asked me a question one time, and they said, well, why would I hire someone who's a known criminal when I can hire someone who who isn't a criminal? And I said, you mean you'd rather hire someone who just hasn't been caught yet?
Right. Yeah.
And I said that sort of flippantly because I was trying to get at the assumptions that the person was making.
Hmm.
They're taking a label and that into, um, the heart of that individual, and I really don't think that that's fair. Um, and so, sort of bringing the question back around, yes, there's often supports that people coming out of the prison system need that other people that you hire probably don't need. And there are organizations that you can help them find, especially if you're part of an organization like the Source. But there are usually community resources that you can find to help those individuals. But in terms of like workplace disruption or workplace, problems or anything like that, I would say not anymore, and not any more than anything else. And in terms of like the turnover, our long-term experience with the length of time somebody works for us, people that have come out of the prison system, um, we're about 5 or 6% in terms of turnover, with that group than we are with the general population. So
One thing I'm really glad you challenged me on is that kind of problem mentality. And there's a reason I ask that, because in talking to other people with companies that don't do this yet, but might have an interest, that's kind of one of the first questions they have. But you're right. And I love that analogy of you
yeah,
being in a different country, not speaking the language. Lester talks about that at length, how he came out, he was literally having panic attacks
wow,
because of the little things that you and I take for granted, like housing, like transportation, that can be just enormous hurdles for
right.
people coming out of prison.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's just not a good handoff from
Right.
the at least in Michigan. Some states are better. Some states have better handoffs. It just kind of depends on some of their state laws.
Hmm.
Michigan is just not great at it. The Department of Corrections, they can drop you. You can be released in a city that you've never lived in. It's not,
Wow.
it's just, it's kind of crazy. And then you're just sort of like, okay, you're left to fend for yourself, unless you have somebody who greets you when you get out, and a lot of the folks don't. So it becomes a really scary. Um, it becomes a scary situation for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's tough for those of us who have no experience with that world just to make assumptions that, you just jump right back in and you should be able to do all this stuff for yourself. And it's really not that easy. I mean, you mentioned it. There can be restrictions on housing. There can be restrictions on ability to get transportation. So yeah, I know that pretty much everyone I've talked to you for the article. I talked to Dan Meyer down at Nehemiah Manufacturing in Cincinnati, and it's pretty typical that you guys who've done it for years kind of have this down around some of that help that you can give people, even just the understanding of like your supervisors on the floor
Yeah.
with what folks like this face. Is there any other advice, if you think about a company that's considering it new today, that you would give for them to get into it?
So I thought about that. So we have. I'll direct you to a website. It's the number. It's 30-2-2.com. But that's actually, it's maintained by my office. So I'm not gonna. It's just, but it's got some resources in it, and it's got some statistics in it. I think that people always ask what the legality is, like what do I have to do to be, you know, make sure I don't have any liability. We answer some of those questions. Um, I and again, I know that your show goes out across the country, so it's different in different states. But
Right.
um, I I just wouldn't be afraid of it. I think you're talking about we're all human beings, and we all have very similar desires for our lives. Um, and I do think that I asked a group of returning citizens in our organization years ago. I'm like, why with us so long, and what's different about our company? And they said, well, you said yes when we asked if we could get a job with you, and we had the same opportunities for every promotion as anybody else. So basically, it was like we opened the door, and we didn't stop them from, we didn't treat them differently once
Right.
they came through the door.
Yeah.
And I kind of looked at them. I'm like, well, it doesn't sound like we did that much. They're like, no, you have no idea how different that is.
Yeah.
And so what's fascinating to me is the ability to hire people that have come into workforce and done a fantastic job and become really a great part of our culture was as easy as saying yes and not treating them differently than anybody else.
Yeah.
That's a pretty small shift in intentionality if you stop and actually think about that for a minute.
To you, it is. But, going back to your point about with those work release kids, as you
Yeah,
said, just telling them, hey, we need you to come to work. We need you to be part of our team. Um, I know from talking to Lester that just that alone is huge for people who, in a big way, have been treated like they're of no value to society.
yeah, that's a fair point, and I probably shouldn't downplay that, and that is kind of embedded in our process now. So to go back to your question about getting started,
Yep.
I do think you need an awareness of the context that some of the people come out of. But if you can set up a framework that can manage that stuff consistently and repeatedly, then it becomes part of your process like anything else, right? And
Yeah.
it really truly is not that difficult. Um, and I would argue that it's well worth it. I mean, I would tell you that some of my best employees today have been with us 20 plus years.
Mhm.
Um, had some experience with being incarcerated.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. And I do think manufacturing uniquely has an offering that is just a great fit for this. So I love that that's the space I'm in, and I'm really gonna continue encouraging this with manufacturers. It's just a really good place for people to reenter if you'll do the work and get them set up right. Um, Anything else on that before we wrap up?
No, I think that what I want to kind of offer is that the parallel between the second chance hiring and maintaining the population of the workforce and the work we did with the source is the thinking is really very much parallel thinking. It's about finding resources, helping people be successful, bringing those resources together in a common place so
Mhm.
that they're relatively easy for people to get.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't, and I love having the conversation about returning citizens, but I don't think that it's exclusive to that group. I think if we can become more aware of
Right.
lots of people that come into our organization that have destabilized their lives, and understanding if we have a little bit of intentionality about helping them find solutions to those problems, we will end up with a stronger, more stable, and people who are more interested in helping our companies succeed, but also more interested in their own personal success because you can show them a pathway to something different.
Yeah, I love that point.
I think that's an opportunity that we have, whether it's with returning citizens or whether it's people that just walk in the front door looking for a job.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think the returning citizens are kind of the crucible that really focus on those things, but you're
Yeah,
absolutely right. These are things that anyone can be dealing with.
right, right.
Wonderful. I'm going to include links in the show description to the source, to 32.2, and to our Forbes article and all that. So definitely, folks, look at all that and dive into it. Before we go, I did want to hear a little bit more about your upcoming book.
Oh, well, oh, that's awesome. Thank you. So,
Yeah.
I've used a ghostwriter to help me write the books, and she asked me when I first got started. She said, "Why do you want to write a book on the source?" And I said, "Well, I really want to write a book on the source because I want to write a second book." She said, "That's not a good idea. That's not the way you do this." I said, "Well."
You did it
So the
anyway.
second book is The Retention Trap, and it's the book I really wanted to write, and it's really about what we've been talking about, Jim. It's about the fact that we have a unique opportunity as employers to really impact people's lives, and we don't. It's not our core competency to think about it. We don't come at employment. We don't start our businesses thinking about employment. We start our businesses because we have a value proposition that we think is better than the guy down the street.
Mhm.
And so when we're successful, we have to hire people, and people bring with them their entire lives. And sometimes that's not what we expected to have in our businesses. And
Yeah.
so instead of getting curious about people's lives, we tend to get frustrated with people's lives. And our HR teams have been built to keep us safe and out of trouble. And I think what that's done is we focus on a lot of things that don't really serve us very well. And I think the focus on retention is one of them. And I think the focus on retention has created a lot of, I'll say, legalism within our organizations. And if we thought more about investing in the people that came to work for us and being curious about their lives and how they define success and what they'd like to do next, I think we would have a very different level of vibrancy in our workforces. And I go as far in the book as to suggest we might want to, as small and mid-market employers, we might want to build a network of employers that we could promote people to. So the idea that somebody could come to work for me for 5 years and maybe get 2 promotions, and I don't have the next level job, but say your company does, and I can show people the openings in your company, and I can help them prepare to get ready for those, and then we can do a handoff. And especially if the companies are culturally aligned.
Mhm.
So we dive into some of the demographics, future demographics
Yeah.
that I think are going to drive small and mid-market really need to look at becoming competent in investing in the people in our workforces if we want to have some of the best and brightest talent bringing our value propositions to market. So again, it's this focus that I've had on talent and talent development for 30 years.
Right. Yeah.
Is really, I want to challenge employers to think differently about how they interact with the people that come to work for them.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I want to thank you for being with us today, Mark. This has just been phenomenal.
Same, Jim. I'm super happy that we've met, and I can't wait till you and I can sit down non-virtually and share some conversation. Since we're in the same city, that'll be fun.
Right. Yeah. Not today. I should mention that Mark is calling in on vacation from overseas. So double thanks for his time today. So yeah, thanks again. And of course, as always, thanks to those of you in the audience. We're here every Tuesday and now most Thursdays. So tune in on those days. We'll have new shows for you. This was just incredibly important stuff. And I'm glad Mark brought it to us. I can't promise every show is going to be this important, but they're all at least a little important. So tune in regularly. We'll be here. Share it with your friends. And as always, like, share, and subscribe. Thanks again for Manufacturing Talks. Jim Vinosky signing off. So long.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.